Okay, Dr. Georgia Christakis obtained her medical degree from FSU College of Medicine and completed her residency and chief residency at Maria Ferrari Children's Hospital. She was a Global Child Health Fellow at Boston Children's Hospital from 2019 to 2021 and faculty from 2021 to 2022. During her time in fellowship, she worked with resident physicians at JFK Medical Center in Monrovia, Liberia, and collaborated on several projects on post-discharge mortality and geospatial mapping of mortality of communities in and around Monrovia, Liberia. She also completed a master's in public health from Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health during her time in Boston. She continues to work with indigenous communities in the United States through Boston Children's Hospital's partnership with Indian Health Services. She's a board-certified pediatrician, a mom, and a believer in the power of informed parenting. She has a background in climate health and global child health and loves talking about how our changing planet impacts children, nature play, and low-waste parenting. I love that term. Okay. Thank you, Georgia. Please take it away.
Thank you. And thank you, Scott, so much for having me. I'll go ahead and ask you, Scott, if you see hands up in the chat, can you just let me know? Or if you see comments that I would need to respond to. But I'm hoping this will be a nice, helpful, but also interactive session. So I have just a few slides to go over, and then at the end, an opportunity to kind of brainstorm some ideas about how to incorporate education around our changing climate into curriculum. But I just want to say quickly, it's an honor to be here. My mother is an educator, a retired educator, and I am a product of Florida's public schools, basically from kindergarten through my medical degree. And so I feel like it's a privilege anytime I get to chat with or work with my educators, and just thank you guys so much for taking the time to kind of listen in and be here today. So we're going to talk about heat and child health. And I have an outline once my slides get started. There we go. Of some of the things that we'll go over today. We'll very briefly touch on how humans are changing the climate. Scott reassured me that many folks here are very well educated on this topic. So we'll kind of just touch on that very briefly. We'll go over specific impacts to Florida with a focus on how heat impacts child health here in Florida. And then we can brainstorm ideas for curricula incorporating climate for students of all ages. So without further ado, I have nothing to disclose. I'm a former Florida Clinicians for Climate Action Vice President and still a member. As Scott mentioned, I received my master's in public health from T.H. Chan School of Public Health, as well as a climate health organizing fellowship from Cambridge Health Alliance, also in Boston, which is where I started to kind of learn more about the topic of climate health. But like many of you, I also, got my passion for this from just being a nature lover, growing up in and around Florida. And I think that is probably what the key to, kind of fostering interest in this topic and passion for the, addressing the impacts of climate change for the next generation. So we'll get to that. Scott, you did such a great job introducing me. So I'm not going to kind of go into this too much. That's a picture of Monrovia, Liberia, where I was previously working, which is another beautiful place close to the equator. So talking very briefly about the greenhouse effect, we all know that the climate is changing. It's getting warmer. We know that we keep kind of making markers, like if we can stop it from getting 1.5 degrees Celsius warmer, that's going to stave off some very serious implications of climate change. And we keep missing those targets. So this is becoming a more and more critical kind of goal that we as human beings need to work towards. But essentially what's happening with the greenhouse effect is that when sunlight reaches the Earth's surface, it can be absorbed into the atmosphere or reflected back into space. And certain gases in the atmosphere prevent the sun's heat from escaping. These greenhouse gases are essentially trapping heat within our atmosphere, including water vapor, carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxide. And those greenhouse gases are increasing. These lead to an increase in both average and extreme temperatures, which then lead to impacts of human health. And that's what we're going to focus on today, is what those impacts are. The Florida Clinicians of Climate Health has identified 8 impacts within 4 categories: direct, spreading disease, disruption of food supply, and disruption of well-being. So those categories, just to briefly touch on them, direct impacts are things that we probably more transparently think about, right? The things that come to mind when you think of climate change: extreme heat, pollution, extreme weather events. For us, that might be more hurricanes, flooding. Spreading disease, however, is also something that is impacted by climate change. We have expanded vector range and more insects causing bites and infections, contaminated water and food sources, disruption of food supply on a global level. We may see famine, hunger, and malnutrition, and disruption of well-being, emotional stress, and that we'll talk on a little bit in our talk. But again, those 8 categories include heat illness, exacerbation of heart and lung conditions, asthma, traumatic injury, water and foodborne illnesses, allergies, vector-borne disease, and emotional stress. And again, we'll talk about most of these in the chat. If you have questions about the other ones, I'm happy to talk about those as well. So first, to kind of just go over the impacts of extreme heat on students. We have a little visual here. One of the kind of major ones that I think about when I think of students is air pollutants causing a rise in rates of asthma and allergies, more frequent exacerbations, and increased mortality from infections of the lungs. Extreme heat in utero. So even from day one of life or prior to being born, we see congenital heart neural tube defects, and there are also other defects that have been implicated in extreme heat as well. Microplastics containing PFAS have been found to be present in solid organs. And climate anxiety. And I think this is something we don't necessarily talk about enough, is how anxiety and depression and mental health disorders are impacted by climate change, how our youths are thinking about this, how young people are affected by just the idea of such a hot planet that they're inheriting, essentially. So I, again, mentioned that I like when talks are more interactive. So I'm going to give you guys a number, and then I'm going to kind of ask for the group maybe to answer in the chat, or, raise your hand and speak up if you feel comfortable. So extreme heat, when we're just to give you a definition, is a period of high heat and humidity with temperatures above 90 degrees for at least 2 to 3 days. During these time periods, the human body works extra hard to maintain normal temperature, and it can lead to increased illness and death, which we'll talk about. So I was looking up these numbers for a separate project. So I was focusing on Miami-Dade County, which is particularly vulnerable to impacts of climate change. In 2013, Miami-Dade County had 5 extreme heat days. How many do you think that they had in 2023? And guesses are fine. Guesses are welcome.
Your answers can be seen, so I don't think it's fair to guess.
Oh, no. Are you guys seeing my notes?
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay. Is it okay if I quickly change sharing to this screen? Thank you for letting me know. I'm hoping that this will work a little bit better. Oh, sorry. Here we go. This is the one I want to share. Does that work better for y'all? Yes. Thank you for letting me know, Nicole. So as Nicole pointed out, you can see these numbers and you can see them on the graph as well. In 2023, we had 50 extreme heat days in Miami-Dade and 60 in 2024. And also, just of note, September of 2024 was the hottest September on record. A little bit about the heat island effect. We've come from all over the state of Florida, but much of Florida is, highly urban. Structures such as buildings, road, and other infrastructure actually absorb and remit the sun's heat more than natural landscape. So if you're looking at that graph in the bottom right, you see that this can cause cities to have temperatures up to 7 degrees Fahrenheit higher than temperatures in outlying areas. Some of these causes are lack of trees and natural landscaping, concrete and other unfavorable building materials that radiate that heat back out, urban geometry. So we don't have many high rises apart from, Miami, Orlando, some of the bigger cities, but these trap heat. And then increased human activity, people driving, using their air conditioning, using energy. And then of course, weather and geography are all contributors. And students are noticing this. So a survey of about 24,000 students that were attending schools in urban heat zones expressed that they felt that 8 degrees hotter due to built environment. They really can feel the difference. So going a little bit more into the health impacts of extreme heat, who is most at risk? So folks with disabilities, the pregnant or already ill, the poor, displaced, or homeless, Children and the elderly, which I want to focus again on children on this talk. Of course, we're concerned about outdoor workers, but in addition, athletes, folks attending outdoor events. And we'll talk a little bit more about what we mean by heat illness. So heat illness is an umbrella term. It can basically encapsulate anything from mild cramping, exhaustion, to changes in mental kind of status and stroke, heat stroke. There are 12,000 average annual heat-related fatalities in the United States, and that may increase by up to 34,000 in the coming years if we don't address climate change. So some practical kind of information for those of us who might be, taking care of students or teaching students, whether it's in an outdoor nature school setting or, at our own schools on the playground. Heat exhaustion, what are we looking for? Kids are dizzy, they may be thirsty, heavy sweating, they may complain of nausea, weakness. And I also want to point out for those of us who are maybe taking care of younger kids or with younger kids, they may not recognize these symptoms. They may just kind of feel very irritable or act very irritable. So we want to check in with them and offer breaks, snacks, water. But when we recognize this heat exhaustion, move that child to a cooler area, loosen the clothing, have them sip some cool water. And if things don't improve, then we do need to seek out additional attention. The big difference between heat stroke and heat exhaustion is impact of, the mental health, mental status. So it may be altered consciousness, confusion, it may be completely fainting and losing consciousness, and just kind of not being unarousable. So this is a situation in which we should call 911 right away, move that person to a cooler area, loosen their clothing, remove extra layers, cool with water or ice, but we want to get EMS so that they can get to an ER right away. I'm not sure if anyone recognizes this young man. If you do, feel free to kind of drop this child's name in the chat. But I'll go ahead and tell his story. On a hot summer day in 2017, Zach had just finished running sprints with his high school football team when he collapsed. He was taken to a children's hospital where he was diagnosed with a temperature of 107 degrees, exertional heat stroke. 11 days later, he was sadly removed from life support. The highest rate of heat illness, just to kind of touch on, who is most at risk, it's athletes like this young man. The highest rates of ER visits for heat-related illness that was not work-related was folks aged 15 to 19. And then when it comes to non-work-related deaths, children aged 0 to 5 are at highest risk. In 2025 alone, just a couple more examples from this summer. A 16-year-old young man from the Memphis area died of heat stroke in July, and a 15-year-old high school student passed away in August from a heat-related emergency, also during a sports event. So one thing that we did do right in Florida is that in 2020, the family of Zachary Martin was able to successfully lobby, along with a lot of other groups, to pass the Zachary Martin Act of 2020. So if you're a coach involved in athletics, this has required some laws, in particular focusing on cold water immersion, which has a 100% rate of survival if used promptly. And so one of the biggest things that they did was move these big buckets to be present on site at major events, to be done prior to EMS transport. So the idea being cool first, transport second. But they did also implement guidelines for proper hydration, especially around sports, emergency action plans for cooling, annual trainings, medical evaluations for athletes, as well as rules about monitoring heat stress levels at sports activities. So how do we prevent heat injury? And just as an aside, if you're taking care of or with spending time with young kids, they may not recognize those symptoms. So it's really important for us as, the adults in the area to encourage them to check in with their bodies, take breaks, have a little bit of water, because oftentimes kids will not recognize or realize until it's very late and they're already experiencing symptoms, that they're overheating. So making sure that kids hydrate well before and during activity, avoiding exertion outdoors during the hottest times of the day and during periods of extreme heat. So that might mean moving our play times or our outdoor times around a little bit. Frequent breaks for hydration and cooling during play and outdoor activities. Appropriate clothing that facilitates heat loss. So lighter, looser clothing, especially natural fabrics that are breathable, is really, really important. And then if a child develops concerning symptoms, or if we're seeing a kid who's very sweaty, seems like they're not feeling well, stopping that exercise immediately. And again, giving them, kind of cold water, bringing them into the AC, letting them rest is really, really important. I want to talk a little bit now about heat, asthma, and allergies. We always have something blooming in Florida. It's a kind of something I talk to my patients about kind of year round, depending on what's blooming, depending on who's having symptoms. But those higher temperatures that we're seeing are increasing pollen production and leading to longer, more intense allergy seasons. In addition, flooding, which we were kind of talking about before other folks came online, has increased with extreme weather events. And this increases mold spores, especially in Florida. We have mold everywhere in the state. This leads to more frequent and severe asthma attacks, which then of course leads to more missed school, sicker kids that aren't going to be learning well. So, heat and climate change can really impact kids with asthma and allergies pretty significantly. So this is a couple of playgrounds. I was wondering if anybody in the audience can maybe point out what they think might be a problem with these two playgrounds. One is not in Florida, it's in South Dakota, but the other one is right here in Palm Beach County.
No shade.
Yep, pretty straightforward, right? So playgrounds can get extremely hot. Some people have kind of gone out into the community and measured surface temperatures of these playgrounds and playground surfaces and equipment and found them to be as high as 170 degrees. And you can get burns as low as 110, 120 degrees. So looking at our playground equipment, if we have the ability to kind of change things out, rubber mulch, synthetic turf, and pour-in rubber tend to be, much, much hotter. They retain heat. Cooler materials like light colors, perforated tiles, but especially like we mentioned, like no lack of shade is a big problem. And kids can get very significant burns on these equipment. So looking out for uncoated metal equipment or metal equipment where there's heat reducing coating that has rubbed off, slides, swings, or other equipment that a child may sit on, checking the temperatures before they're playing. Dark colored plastics and rubbers, especially surfacing under and around playground equipment, and asphalt and concrete, of course, are all at high risk of getting really, really hot. So if your playground equipment is outdated, some things that you can do, sails can work fairly well. Natural tree coverage is awesome if you can manage that. And maybe we can have a little bit more of an in-depth conversation about that, once I've finished up with the slides, which we're almost done. I'm sure that everyone here has some great ideas. So I did want to touch base about child mental health. There have been a few studies on this, quite a few, but one that I found particularly interesting was a study of patients or mothers in particular, pregnant mothers who were pregnant during Hurricane Sandy. And they looked at cortisol levels in these women and in the children that they gave birth to for up to 3 years afterwards. And they saw increased levels of cortisol and anxiety in early childhood just from experiencing an extreme weather event in the womb. So I just found that to be fascinating and deeply concerning. And kind of going back to extreme heat in Florida, hotter temperatures in studies in California, other parts of the US and Australia have been associated with increased mental health emergency department visits and crises in youth and adolescents, which, in the pediatric community from 2020 onward, this has been an increasing problem for us, that we're seeing more and more youth who are seeking out emergency care for their mental health problems. So this is something that, we're deeply concerned about in the child health community. And I imagine, perhaps you're seeing something like that as educators as well. So that's the main kind of educating kind of slides. I wanted to kind of pose a question for everyone, and maybe we can start a discussion from here. How do we encourage safe outdoor time for kids during heat season? And heat season runs from May to October, so we're still right in the middle of it.
Thank you, Joy. I'm gonna, I don't know if you need to have the slide up, but I'm gonna put us on full person mode if we can, and so I can see if people have, questions, and I can see if they want to raise their hand or something. Could you jump out of share? There you go. Okay, thank you. And if you need to go back in, please do at some point. Okay. So let's see, we didn't get introductions from a couple people here. I know Stephanie is not an educator. I don't know Janet or Melissa. Are either one of you in the school, and you have a school teacher, and do you have some thoughts about the question that Georgia raised? Hmm. Anyone else?
I guess I can take a stab at it just to keep the dialogue going. So how do we encourage safe outdoor time for kids during heat season? So I always lead with education. I think education is the key point. But ironically, I don't feel like it's the children who need to be educated, it's the parents. What I've noticed, especially running a nature school in Florida outdoors for the past several years, one of the biggest things that I get when the parents like come to me is this, oh my gosh, but it's too hot for my kid. Like this already preconceived story that their child is going to not do well. And I noticed that like 99% of the time, the parents that have this story, when their kids actually come and like are land in the space with us, they don't have the reactions that their parents think they do. What I notice is constantly oh, you're too hot. Are you too hot? Oh my gosh, you must be too hot. That's where I notice that a lot of it stems from. What ends up happening is the child gets overwhelmed. The child loves the attention and gets coddled, right? That's a big one that we get. Oh yeah, I'm too hot. I don't want to do this, right? It's an excuse for them to check out. And then I think that a lot of the times it's like forcing this narrative onto the children instead of educating them how to become aware of the body. In our school situation, we start every day with the body awareness. We're encouraging them to become aware of this is what it feels like, this is what you can do. And I feel like that education point is so important. It's so important and so underutilized. The other big thing that I notice is, and I'm sorry for any of you Northerners, but people love the idea of living in Florida. They love the idea of living in Florida. And so you get all these people from New York, from New Jersey, from all these up north places, and they're like, oh, we're going to come to Florida. And then they get to Florida and they experience like one real summer and they're like, oh my gosh, like we're just going to stay locked in our house with the AC on blast on 73, I think is what someone told me yesterday, for the whole summer. And I'm like, yeah, but our bodies are naturally adaptive. Like we are a part of nature and nature is naturally adaptive. We are naturally adaptive. So when we are not allowing ourselves to go out even for 15 minutes, during these like extreme heat times, or not times, but months, we are robbing ourselves of the ability to learn how we naturally adapt. We're robbing ourselves of the ability to not be put in those circumstances, so that we can kind of grow and learn from that. So education, education, education.
Knowledge is power, right? Yeah, my son and I were just out this morning and it got to a feels like temperature way above 95. Karina, we were actually at Tall Cypress Natural Area, which I don't know if that's part of your purview, but it's a beautiful area. But yeah, I think with little kids, we just want to remind them, check in with them, make sure that we're seeking shade when we're taking our snack breaks. And then another thing that I do as a parent is, focus on water play. If we're talking about more nature schools and things like that, I do a little bit of a free forest school down here. So, that's something that we really kind of focus on in the hotter months. I see somebody commented, I'm a STEM specialist, so I'm not always with students. I agree that teachers and students need to be aware. My son works outdoors and takes frequent breaks and lots of hydration. Yeah, absolutely. But I agree, Nicole. I don't think that the answer is just staying indoors all the time. I think that's a disservice to both, kids who can benefit so much from being outdoors in nature. And there's, studies behind the impacts of nature on mental health and overall health. And it benefits nature as well. And what you can maybe talk about that a little bit too, about how being out in nature can foster kids who are stewards of this earth.
Julie had her hand up there. Let me see.
I
Maybe
absolutely,
Karina.
I absolutely agree with that idea. It's a disservice to keep the kids inside, or anybody, any age. It's an absolute disservice because we need to have that natural connection, and there's so much research that indicates that it does support mental and physical health. My question, though, is kind of follow up because Nicole, I also agree with you. I have read about, and George, I wanted to know if you had more specific data or studies, but the acclimation. So I personally, I am one of those northerners, but I actually love the heat and I am not bothered much by it, but I'm also outside every day. So if you're going to be acclimating kids, what's a good strategy for that, particularly if they have the parents, like you said, Nicole, who think that it's too hot and they spend their time inside? So is there a good approach to acclimating the kids? Obviously, there comes a point where it's just too hot and you can die. But before you get to that point, what's your recommendations for that acclimation process?
That is a good question. I don't know that I've come across specific data. Maybe there is. I tend to focus on or encourage, when we're in our nature play group, going out earlier in the day or later in the day outside of those peak hot times, 11 to 4, 10 to 4 roughly. So that can be helpful if somebody's acclimating to a new area. And again, if it's possible, I know we probably come from all kinds of education settings. Some of us are in traditional classrooms. And so water play is something that I'm a huge fan of because it's a natural way to cool kids off. And then just taking breaks, even if it's, maybe these kids can just start with a half-hour walk every morning, and then they're kind of slowly starting to get more and more outdoors and into nature. And, one last thing I'll say is, May to October is not the whole year. You have this whole other time of year that we can also spend outdoors and expand our time. So again, I think that there's definitely some happy medium here where we can meet and keep people safe. The last thing I will say is certain activities are higher risk. Again, I didn't know who exactly I'd be speaking to. So looking at all educators, including coaches, some of the highest risk activities during extreme heat are actually football and cross country running. Those have been shown to have the highest rates of heat illness. So something with less exertion may be a good choice to start these kiddos out. Even if it's like a story time outside, which Karina, again, I happened to see on the Broward County, kind of bulletin at the nature center that they're doing some nature kind of story times for kids. And I thought that was really cool. So.
Karina, you got your hand up, right? Go ahead.
I wanted to just add to that. So, in addition to, like you said, bringing the kids out at certain times of the day, avoiding that peak heat, from, 12 to 4 or whatnot, just prioritizing bringing them in the shade, and teaching the kids as well, that being in the shade is going to significantly reduce the direct sunlight that they're in and the overall heat that they're in, as well as staying hydrated. And we just have to use our our common sense when we're bringing them out there. If it's too hot, we won't. But at the same time, like you were saying, we want to make sure that they're getting that outside time, but trying to bring them out in the grass because we know that the natural areas help reduce that heat, as well as prioritizing shade. So
yeah, absolutely.
Julie's got her hand up.
Me again. Karina, that brings up a really important point that was illustrated by an artist and a writer in Chicago called the Folded Map Project. And that idea of having those natural spaces and the shade spaces is not available to everybody. And this Folded Map Project looked at people who live on opposite sides of the city on the same street, but their addresses were north versus south. And just the difference in, if you travel the street, the difference in the temperature because of the lack of shade and the lack of green space. And so as the heat increases, that social justice and environmental equity becomes a critical point that is going to be really important. We need people to still go outside, but they need a safe place where they can do that. And that includes tree cover and green space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that point as well. Because, we have to be advocating for our citizens, our the people of our towns, because if we are limiting all of our green spaces and we're tearing all of it down to build, the newest thing, it's just taken away from the community. And that's one of the, major points as well.
Rita, and this has, there's activities. One of the questions I was going to ask George is about activities or lessons related to heat things. And one of the things you bring to mind is sort of this idea of planting or putting in canopies and trees as a school project for kids. And actually, my background as a science educator, of course, you want people to actually go out and collect data and measure before and after and do all those kinds of fantastic things that are related to science. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts about, have you seen curricula that people have developed around heat?
I'm sorry, was this question directed towards me?
Well, I guess not necessarily, but Georgia maybe,
Oh, Georgia.
But if you've done something along those lines as well, maybe you want to contribute to that.
I'll say I love that question. As I'm not an educator, so I don't necessarily look up curricula. I have a few ideas, but I'd love to hear what Karina has to say.
So the county does have heat maps actually on the resilience page, and it's funny because we're developing curriculum right now around the conversations of heat, and so it's still in progress on our end, but I'm sure there's other teams that are have completed that work. But that is actually part of things that we're going to be offering is going around the campuses and talking about heat and actually using thermometer meters and showing the kids the difference between being outside on the paved areas, maybe by like the car loops and bus loops, versus on the playground, under a tree, on a grassy area.
So that was kind of what I had in mind. And if you wanted to build on that, looking at the difference between a regular temperature and a wet bulb temperature and think there's a lot you can do with that for, kiddos who are maybe on the older end, middle school and high school.
Have you heard of this curriculum? Oh, maybe it's not going to show you, but it's called Project Wild. It is it's created by the Fish and Wildlife agencies. So all of the Fish and Wildlife, the Florida ones in every state created this. It's a nationally certified curriculum. It is a curriculum that is primarily reached out for traditional educators. But the non-traditional educators have been getting certified in it as well. There's Project Wet, there's Aquatic Wild, there's a bunch of them. And some of the activities that you're talking about is actual, there's classroom. This is such an incredible, if your county doesn't have this already, I highly recommend, because there's one, I cannot think of the name of it off the top of my head, but we have done it many times. And we talk about how reptiles specifically will hide in the shade because they're, cold-blooded creatures. But even if it gets too hot for them, what are the effects? And so we'll take magnifying glasses. We'll see how, through windows and mirrors, how the heat is amplified. We'll take thermometers. We'll go around and we'll measure the heat, in the shade and in the hot pavement areas. And the kids just love it. One of the things that I've learned doing this nature school thing is the more that you can get the children involved, they nag the parents enough where they're like, what are we doing, Mom? Let's do it. And that it usually kind of corrects itself. But this curriculum is incredible. It's in all 50 states. It is considered a nationally certified curriculum. So us homeschoolers love it as well. So if we utilize it and say if at any point my children decide, oh, I want to go to a high school full time, all of the stuff that has been taught in this curriculum is transferable through transcripts. So that's an incredible thing as well. But I highly, highly recommend this. I've been trying to convince the city and county that I live in to let, because I'm certified to teach facilitators this, to let me teach it for like all county members, but they're like, conservation, climate change, that's dumb. So, but we'll get there. We'll get there. The county is doing better, but oh yeah, the Project Wet, Project Wild Learning Tree. Yeah, they're all fantastic. These are I'm literally looking at all the books now. Aquatic Wild, Birds of a Prey. They're all from the exact same people, and they're incredible. About not even necessarily just for outdoor learning, but bridging the gap on keeping the children that are contained in the classroom and letting them like understand how to experience the outdoor learning or why they would want to. Like the more that I have learned that you spike their interest, the more they're naturally going to want to do it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wanted to see if Janet put in the chat room there that she's a STEM specialist, although I'm not sure what age group she works with. I don't know if Melissa's a teacher, but I wanted to check with them about if they've encountered either the curricula that you were showing, Nicole, or if they've got some other activities, how those might differ by age group, if they've run into those things.
Yeah, so the curriculum is K through, well, there's two. The Project Wild, the big ones that are project based, they're K through 12. And then Project Learning Tree, what is this one called? Getting Little Feet Wet, and then Growing, I think it's called Growing Up Wild. Those are early education based. So those go for like the 1-2-year-olds all the way up to the 6-year-olds. So all of these curriculums in general will support a child's development from 1 year old all the way up to 18 years old. So I highly recommend them. The certifications they all go towards hours for the traditional teachers, which you guys need educator hours. This is included in that. I believe it's 8 to 10 hours per curriculum, and each one is its own separate curriculum. So, and then I think in total, like as an untraditional educator, I think I had to pay $5 to join, and I got to do it at the Brevard Zoo, which is incredible because who doesn't want to go like spend the day at the zoo and like learn? It was so cool. We got to go like behind the scenes and hang out with the sloths. So usually the facilities that are offering these types of education are sanctuaries like myself, or their zoos, or their nature preserves, or their state parks. The state parks are also, all of the state parks are also certified in this education curriculum.
Awesome.
I did want to ask a question, if I may.
Sure. And then it looks like we have a comment from Melissa after that. Maybe Melissa can share with us a little bit.
So it was specifically when Karina was talking, and she was talking about how like the schools, like how they have all of these kind of hot areas and stuff, right? Like the pickup line is all concrete and stuff. And when you were talking in your presentation about the heat island specifically, where you how we cause that, I feel like my brain goes to, okay, so then why, instead of focusing on conservation, or I'm sorry, curriculum heavy on how to like educate the kids about the heat, then why aren't we like kind of having the conversation about like bringing more trees, planting more community gardens in the schools, like creating more of a way to take the public school system out of a heat island environment and creating it more adaptable? I feel like that's an easy solution, and a more conscious way to handle it, even if we put big potted plants like around the car pickup lines and things like that, where we're creating that space to naturally lower the heat index in those areas. Like, how come that's not where we're going first, I guess, is the question. Like solution oriented. Why aren't we being solution oriented instead of saying, oh my gosh, this is a thing. This is, we're fear driven and we're educating based on this fear, but there's clear solutions here.
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. wasn't necessarily in the scope of this topic, of this particular talk, but there are really amazing nonprofit organizations doing that kind of work and doing it in a way that is, kind of climate justice and climate equity focused. I would definitely recommend checking out and supporting Community Greening. They had a mission that, and maybe they're more active in Palm Beach than other counties in Florida, but I believe that they're national. And they're do a lot of tree giveaways with cities in the area to kind of help combat this. Totally agree with you on gardening being, kind of a great avenue in for more traditional schools and students. But Community Greening is one that was doing a lot of great work. Some of their funding did get cut this past spring in the most recent administration kind of budget cuts. They were one of the organizations that I know was definitely impacted and had to cancel some of those, kind of tree giveaways and things like that. But it's definitely a piece of the puzzle. I think the more I learn about climate health, the more I realize that this topic is so broad and there's so many different things that you kind of can go into. And then the only other thing I'll say, and then maybe Karina, you can speak to this more, is there are some really great resilience offices that are county based and also city based. And a lot of the resilience and sustainability offices are trying to do this work. I know in Palm Beach County, they were working on, I believe it's called, I'm going to butcher it, I believe it's called the Glades community. And that was unfortunately the one that was cut because, of course, again, the most low-income communities, and this was a migrant community, did not have the funding to kind of keep their tree giveaway. So, it is all tied together. Absolutely. And Karina, if you want to kind of add to that.
Yeah. Excuse me. Nicole, so as to what you were saying, solution-based thinking. So I have to, throw this in there that that is what our program does. So between the partnership, it's a Broward County partnership called Naturescape with the schools, Broward County Public Schools. So we do education, but we also focus on plantings, native plants on school campuses, as well as trees. So we'll supply those through multiple grants that we have in our program. And so we will do plantings with them as well. We focus on that and education. And then we also have tree giveaways, which Georgia was mentioning. So if you guys are not aware of them, Broward County Naturescape, not necessarily the school partnership, but we have a community program that's for residents. For Broward County residents, we try to do at least a few tree giveaways every year. Our biggest tree and native plant giveaway is called Water Matters Day, which this year is going to be in March. I can't remember which Saturday it is, but it is on our website. So every year on Water Matters Day, we do a 2,000 trees and native plants that we give away for free to the residents that attend the event. And so you can get a native pollinator plant, which of course, also promotes pollinators either at your home or if you bring it to your school campus, schools, as well as either a fruit tree or a native tree. And so, that is something that we're working on, and that's what our program essentially does. So we provide to the community, but also to the schools. And so, I totally agree with you. That's what every county should be doing, really, is focusing on making the schools less hot. But, it's kind of a balance between education and also trying to solve those issues.
Julie's got her hand up.
And I think that the opportunities you're talking about, Karina, with the planting of the trees and the natives can be easily incorporated into science lessons as well. Observational studies, are you attracting more pollinators? You can keep track of that. You can do butterfly tracking or bee tracking. What a lot of people don't realize is that new saplings, trees need care. So it's not like you just plant it and walk away, that they need to be taken care of. And so, learning about what the trees need to survive and monitoring their growth and looking for, like if you put in a keystone type tree, like for us it's oaks, how many different species are taking advantage of and living with the oak. So there's so many opportunities with those solutions on continuing education about the natural world, and observational skills and testing. And, depending on your level and if you have the capacity, if you're planting native plants, if you can test the soil, see if it's enriched as a result of the natives. There's so many cool ideas that you can build off of that.
Right. I was going to ask, Melissa had a comment, and I wanted to see if she was interested in sort of being on screen or just talking about her recommendation here. I think she's based in Colorado, as an education designer. And hi, Melissa, how are you doing? Oh, I recognize you from the clean group there. So you want to talk a little bit about what your recommendation? I mean, obviously it's a far different geography than we get here in Florida, but we do have fires and that sort of thing. So you want to talk for a minute? Oh, we can't hear you. There you go.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Sorry, I've been having some technical problems all day, which is why I was staying off camera, but looks like it's working. Yeah, so I guess the resource I shared, I just thought might be of interest. It's not specifically like the topic we've been talking about, is just more, how do we stay safe and help kids be aware of their bodies and their environment and staying safe. But if you wanted to extend a little further and be like, this is how I keep myself safe from heat, but also how is increased heat in our world affecting the world around me. And so there's some really great explorations. That whole curriculum is definitely designed with Colorado or the Western states in mind, but I think there's a lot of things you could use to apply to wherever you are. And there's stuff about flooding too, which isn't necessarily heat related, but also there's more heat in the atmosphere, so more storms happening, so there's a lot of kind of these more climate change impacts, and resilience is really the focus of these lessons. So kind of a nice thing to focus on. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for that. We're kind of winding down here. I'm going to ask Georgia if she has any closing comments here. Then I just want to show you a slide of the next month's event. So, Georgia.
Sure. So first of all, don't be a stranger. Scott knows how to get in touch, and I think everyone, on here has, something to share and something that I could learn from too. So if you have follow-up comments or questions, please do be in touch, and I can quickly share my screen too, if you'd like, with kind of my email and Instagram handle. This is the book that I found very helpful for our, I come from more of a health background, so this was written by two pediatricians. And it's called Digging into Nature, Outdoor Adventures for Happier and Healthier Kids. Again, my kids are 0 to 5, so they're much younger. We're not necessarily doing as much curriculum-based learning apart from a little free forest school that we also do. But there is a chapter for nature in the later years, school age and beyond, and also navigating nature for children with special healthcare needs. So, if anyone is in a public school where there's lots of kids who are experiencing asthma and allergies, they have some great information here. I'm not affiliated. I don't get money for saying this. I've read the book and I've used and implemented a lot of the suggestions with my own kids. I'll briefly share the screen and then, turn it off so that you can also, share yours as well, Scott. And let's see if I can go to the next slide too. Give me 1 second. So if you need to reach me, I can be reached through my website. There's like a quick contact me form. I am active on and off on Instagram doing educational stuff, and then also on LinkedIn professionally. Those are probably the 3 best ways to reach out to me if you have any questions or comments afterwards. But thank you everyone so much for your time. And
Yeah, we didn't see your screen there. There's a comment by Nicole that you want. Oh, there you go. That's doing something. That's a whiteboard, huh?
Close whiteboard. Sorry.
Okay.
I'll try one more. I'm gonna go ahead and drop them in the chat. How about that?
All right, great.
You can share your screen.
I wanted to thank you so much for your presentation and the lively discussion we had today. I mean, I think this is great information and idea sharing, and doing some little brainstorming here because we certainly are going to be facing this problem for a foreseeable future and probably getting worse. So we all need to be thinking about these kinds of issues.
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for your time.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna go back and see if I can pull up the next month's event here. I was telling Georgia a little bit about this. We're going to have some speakers from Florida Gulf Coast University at the end of September and talk about some of the databases they've created. Melissa will be interested in this. Is kind of the Floridian version of the CLEAN database that they put together, which the CLEAN database is a national sort of depository of curriculum references. And the folks at Florida Gulf Coast University have got some grants to put this together recently. So they're going to take us through this. So appreciate if you can show up next week or next month, sorry. And thanks again for joining us. I'll be in touch with you with some follow-up email and information and put you on our list for the future references. So thanks again, and we will make a point of distributing the link to our entire Florida Climate Educator Network and to the folks that missed tonight's event. But anyway, so thank you. Appreciate it, and we'll bid you good night. Thanks again.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, Georgia. Nice to meet you all.